everyone agrees that there is a need to update our water infrastructure system. The question is what price tag to put on that issue. Governor Cuomo's budget plan included a $2 billion clean water fund, while the Senate Republicans want to spend up to $8 billion on clean water as the negotiations continue. What is that number going to be looking like ultimately? Joining me now to talk more about this and other water-related issues is Liz Moran of the Environmental Advocates of New York. Liz, thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me today.
So one thing in doing a lot of the reporting on this I've noticed is that, the final figure on the water infrastructure is kind of a moving target at this point. I don't think many people expect it to ultimately be $8 billion, but it does seem to be going to be, to quote Tom O'Mara, the senator from Elmira, who I spoke to yesterday about this, he thinks it's going to be north of $2 billion. It's going to be in the multiples of billions of dollars. Is that a good step? Is that a good start?
Yeah, it's certainly exciting to see so many figures put on the table for water and water needs. Looking at the billions, it's a great step in the right direction. But we do know that the $2 billion proposal would be spread over the course of 5 years. So it's actually $400 million for each of those years. And the needs are much larger than that. It's actually been estimated that over the next 20 years, we're going to need to invest at least $80 billion in drinking water and wastewater infrastructure. Now, the Senate came forth with a huge proposal, like you said, of $8 billion. And while this is still on the table and being negotiated, we really need our legislators to step up and push as much funding to go into this as possible. A lot of folks in communities that have been impacted by water contamination crises, folks that are dealing with water main breaks and sewage overflows, disruptions to their everyday life are counting on legislators to lead here. This is the kind of stuff why folks feel distrustful of their government. They want to see these promises met.
So, I mean, we are still talking in the hundreds of millions of dollars each year if this I guess would ultimately be bonded, so we'd have to wait for voters to ultimately approve it via referendum. But if we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, is that money going to be also spent quickly enough too? Because as you say, there's a lot of need right now on, say, updating not just drinking water, but also sewage projects, which are obviously far different.
So just to be clear, the $2 billion would be bonded, but it won't be a bond act.
It would not be a referendum.
Right. It wouldn't have to go to the voters. So that $2 billion would be there. And I do have to say that we've had a very successful water infrastructure grant program for the past few years. It was an initial investment of $400 million to be spent over the course of 3 years. A really good start. It's something that New York State is leading on that we aren't seeing happening in other states. And that money has been very well spent. There's been numerous projects that have benefited from this money, and we know that the need is certainly there. So I don't think we're too concerned about money getting out the door. It's just a matter of making sure that there's enough money there for every community that needs it.
One discussion that's been at the Capitol so far, I think it's originated in the Assembly, is having at least 10% of that money sent to New York City for New York City's water quality needs. Now, half the state's population lives in New York City. It's obviously very important, but a lot of the need that we've talked about when it comes to water quality has been in upstate New York. Communities like Hoosick Falls, Petersburg, Newburgh, on Long Island as well. They've got some serious water contamination issues that they're dealing with is there. And also out in Western New York, is there a need in New York City where 10% of this money should potentially be dedicated to their water quality needs?
There's no question that there's tremendous need in New York City, just like there is in the other regions of the state. New York City has actually had a lot of problems with combined sewer overflows. They have around, if I'm not mistaken, about 28 billion gallons of sewage that ends up in the New York Harbor annually. So there's no question that there's a need there. It's just a matter of making sure that there's enough funding in the pot for all of these things. You were talking about something that I think is pretty important to know about the proposal that's on the table. The $2 billion plan is not just for your traditional infrastructure. It's not just for fixing pipes and taking care of combined sewer overflows, et cetera. It's for a lot of different water initiatives. It's for source water protection. It could be for, we've heard potentially for going to concentrated animal feeding operations. It can go to a lot of different things, all worthy of funding, but the final number will be really key there to making sure that everything is effectively done.
Now, obviously, the budget isn't just concerning this bond that would be paying for all those water issues. There's some other water issues that are in the budget as well, including testing for water quality and contaminants and issues like that we saw really come into relief in Hoosick Falls and in other communities like that. Just what's the status of some of those testing initiatives, and will they survive passage in the budget?
So you may remember that back in fall, the state held water quality hearings in the Capital Region and on Long Island, and it brought to light that there are tremendous water issues that the state needs to lead on. At the time, the governor issued a press statement saying that New York is going to step up and close what is a huge regulatory loophole. Right now, federally, communities that have over 10,000 residents and up in public water systems have to test for emerging contaminants. And communities that are under 10,000 go under the radar. So the governor said that we're going to take care of that. He also said that we're going to start testing for private wells for different contaminants. Because right now, there's very little done for private wells.
And a lot of this was done in order to essentially, fill a hole, as it were, that the EPA, that he says the EPA was not taking care of.
Exactly. He said that if the EPA doesn't step up, we're going to act. And right now, we have a presidential administration that is proposing to make tremendous cuts to our Environmental Protection Agency, is already proceeding with huge regulatory rollbacks. And in the face of that, the budget process is an opportunity for the governor to lead, especially on these areas. And we're hearing that we might not see the strongest versions of these bills come forward. And that's very scary. Think about what's happening in Hoosick Falls. These are moms that have been advocating tirelessly for what happened to their community to not happen anywhere else. So kids don't have their futures in jeopardy, so they aren't scared about what's coming out of their taps. And right now, if the governor doesn't bring forth the best version of these plans, that's on him. That's a failure to these moms.
One thing, and I think this was indicative really with the Hoosick Falls story, was just how the government at all levels was reactive. And I think if you ask residents in Hoosick Falls, they will say that the government was certainly very slow to react. But when it comes to testing, that's kind of a proactive approach to water quality issues. But at the same time, I can imagine that on a practical level, certain testing of, say, private wells is very difficult to achieve ultimately, potentially very expensive to achieve. I mean, what are some of the hindrances to actually doing individual testing of private wells and also testing some of the smaller communities that probably have the greatest need in terms of being on the lookout for water contamination?
When it comes to protecting public health, water testing is worth it. There are over 80,000 chemicals that are on the market that are unregulated. And look at what happened in Hoosick Falls. These folks were in the dark for years about this chemical that was lurking in their water and making them sick. And that shouldn't happen anywhere else in the state. It should be a straightforward and easy thing to do to make sure that there aren't contaminants that are making us sick in our water. This is something that we really think should be, that our legislators should be unified on to doing and making happen.
Do you get the sense that they're dedicated on going after this issue? Because the governor started this week raising concerns about federal government budget cuts and its potential impact on New York. Do you get the sense that they're still dedicated to this issue?
We certainly would hope so. If we don't have some of these issues tackled in the budget, then they definitely need to happen by the end of the legislative session, by June. Because right now, these were promises that were made to the residents of New York State. These are promises that were made to the people in Hoosick Falls, in Newburgh. And if it isn't accomplished now, then when? How much longer do the people of New York State have to wait to make sure that their water is being as thoroughly protected as possible?
Okay, Liz Moran of Environmental Advocates, thanks so much for your time this evening.
Thank you.